Welcome, everyone, and I am very pleased to have with me Dr. Richard Holland, and he is the author, a co-author of a book called Good Arguments. The subtitle is Making Your Case in Writing and Public Speaking. Here is what the current copy looks like. Probably looks very familiar to you there, Rich, and
Yeah.
I'm so glad you're here with me to be able to talk about your book and also Dr. Forrest's book.
Yeah,
Um,
it's great to be with you.
yeah, no, I appreciate it. So this is a very important topic to talk about: logic and the Christian faith and
Mm.
the robustness of the Christian faith. You hail, well, you come from an academic background here. You have an MDiv and PhD in theological studies with a concentration in philosophy of religion from Southeastern Baptist Theological Seminary.
Right.
And you are currently an assistant professor of philosophy at Grand Canyon University. So that's excellent. Glad to hear that.
Yeah.
How's your time there? How are things going?
We love it here. We moved here. I came here 3 years ago to Phoenix and had no idea what to expect. I knew it was hot, but other than that, I had no idea what to expect. But we actually love it here. There's lots of great people, and other than July, August, and September, the climate is fantastic.
Oh, okay. Yeah, there's a couple of months there might be a
That's right.
little warm for you. And you and your wife, Larissa, and four kids, 19, 16, 14, and 12.
Yep.
Are they all still home, or is the 19-year-old off doing something in the cooler
He's
weather?
Yeah, our 19-year-old is a second semester sophomore here at GCU. In fact,
Oh,
he's taking my introduction to philosophy class
ah.
this semester. And our 16-year-old, we homeschooled him all the way up. Our 16-year-old is starting dual enrolled classes here at GCU. And then the other two are still in process.
All right. Well, you're going to have one of your kids in class there. You're going to be extra hard, extra critical there.
Probably. Probably.
All right. Well, we will pray for him. No, that's excellent. You were the author of a co-author of the book we're looking at, as mentioned, Good Arguments, but also the author of a book called God, Time, and the Incarnation, where you'll look at temporality,
Mhm.
time, and its relation to Christ and his ministry here on earth. I have not had the privilege of reading it yet, but temporality and divine temporality and its relationship is very interesting to me. I've done a little bit of research on that already, and I plan on getting that book and adding it to my repertoire.
Maybe we can
So
talk in the future about that one.
there you go, because the future does not exist yet.
Right. That's right.
So I would, you know what? We'll do that. I will read the book and have you back on, and we'll
Yeah,
talk
that sounds
about that.
great. That sounds great.
That's oh man, so many things. But well, we will stick to today's topic for now. And you teach intro to philosophy and ethics, Christian worldview, and applied ethics at the school there, which is excellent. So
Yep.
that's fantastic. Baker Academics Publishing, Grand Rapids, for the book. So let's go ahead and jump in here regarding the book in question and of Good Arguments. How would you give a little summary statement of the book? I know the subtitle does making your case in writing
Right.
and public speaking, does a pretty good job. But at the same, is there anything you want to add to that to help people understand what this book is designed to do?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I think that, the overall tone, or maybe you could say our approach, is to provide an apologetic of sorts for arguing, why arguing is a good thing. And we even address in the very outset of the book, of course, the misconceptions and the different ways that the word argument is used in everyday language. People generally, when I teach intro to philosophy, and we start the unit on argumentation, I usually have to spend quite a bit of time dispelling misconceptions about what arguing is. Um, so yeah, so I suppose our impetus was to make a case for why it's important to make a case for things. So
Sure.
it's So it's an apologetic for why arguments are important, why reasoning is important, how it plays a role in everyday communication, but then also in things like academic papers, business letters, and formal communication, things like that.
Excellent. Oh, that's fantastic. Yeah, there's I'm sure there's quite a few misconceptions that have to be dealt with out there, and as you mentioned in the introduction, you do address some things. I want to read a little extended excerpt from your book,
Okay.
and then have a question to follow shortly. So basically, it goes like this. In the introduction of your book, you begin with, in essence, a brief discussion on reason, arguments, and faith, as you mentioned, which is great. That helps provide context and understanding where you're coming from, and helps the reader establish that. You then state the following: the Pharisees asked Jesus the simple question, "Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath?"
Mhm.
Jesus' answer is obviously yes. But Jesus does not simply answer the question. Instead, he presents an argument, you say. And I agree, he does. He makes a claim and gives a logical, systematic account of the reasoning that supports his claim. You say that on page 13. So the view that you're promoting here may come as a surprise to many people, both Christians and non-Christians. So often the view is that quality logic and reasoning are not found in Scripture, or not part of the mind of believers, and certainly sometimes not part of Christ. But you're saying that Jesus did, in fact, use quality logic, reasoning, and even arguments. Can you please expound on that for us?
Yeah.
Because there's some Christians are like, what are you talking about? Go
Yeah,
ahead.
I'm glad you raised that point. I mean, it's the context there, what we're addressing in that section of the book is where the Pharisees are trying to trap Jesus, of course, in this seemingly innocent question. If you don't really understand what they're getting at, it seems innocent, but it's kind of a trap question. And Jesus is addressing this question: is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath? Now, obviously, if there was ever anyone who ever walked the face of the earth who was in a position to make a simple, clear, authoritative declaration, Jesus was the one who could do that, right? Jesus could have simply said yes and then moved on.
Right.
So really, it wasn't a matter of Jesus' authority at that point. Jesus decided to make an appeal to the reasoning faculties of his audience, and by extension to us. When we read now, we read that passage in Scripture, we are recipients of the same appeal. So he is, both the Pharisees and anybody else who happen to be listening, Jesus is appealing to their ability to reason, to think through, and to understand why Jesus would say that it's lawful to heal on the Sabbath. So yeah, that's Jesus is appealing to our reasoning faculties there.
That's very interesting, because it seems that what you're saying is Jesus is not just he doesn't just appeal to, and he does sometimes, Scripture, in this case, Old Testament.
Mm-hmm.
He appeals to the ability to be able to think through an issue, and
Yes.
that Christians should be able to listen to this based on that. Are you implying something like that?
Yeah, that's right. Reasoning is fundamental to who we are, as God has made us to be in his image. And God has granted us this, what we're calling reason, this faculty, that we have, that helps us to understand the world. So it's essential to who we are as human persons. Our reasoning is essential to who we are as human persons, made in God's image. And so it just makes sense, no pun intended, for Jesus to appeal to that fundamental aspect of who we are in order to convey his message. And you're right, Scripture, it's not just in that passage, it's everywhere. It's everywhere, all throughout Scripture. Both when we read stories where somebody's talking to somebody else and they appeal to reason, there are some famous passages like Paul before the men of Athens. He makes basically an extended argument for how we know God can't live in a temple built by humans. And he makes his case. He appeals to their reasoning abilities to understand that claim that God can't live in a temple built by a human hand. And that was just one example. They're all through Scripture. whether it's one person talking to another, like Jesus did to the Pharisees or Paul did to the men of Athens, using these, appealing to their reasoning to make the case, or whether it's Scripture itself speaking to us as the reader, doing the same thing. The other example I think of is John the evangelist at the end of his book. There, he says, "Look, Jesus did all kinds of stuff, but I'm writing about these things so that you would believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God, and that by believing you would have life in his name." And so essentially what John is saying there is that, yes, it's biographical. Of course, it's biographical. But John could have told us all sorts of things that were biographical. And John picked things to tell us so that we would think about those things and conclude rationally that, yeah, Jesus must be exactly who we say he is. He must be the Son of God. He must be God incarnate, given the things that we observe, the things that John tells us about who Jesus was and what he did and what he said.
Wow, so it's more than just using Scripture. It's using the God-given faculties that we possess. Now,
right.
that tends to imply something here about God. You mentioned being created basically in his image and likeness, Genesis 1:26-27. Now, you're implying that us being created in his image and likeness implies that God has this characteristic or trait. Is that what you're saying? That he is a rational being, and so logic and rationality are part of the nature of God? Because usually when we talk about the nature of God, we talk about his omnipotence. We talk about God's holiness. We talk about his mercy and his grace and his omniscience, which is all true and all right. But you're bringing up another aspect of the nature and character of God that might include, or does include, what?
Yeah, I hesitate only slightly, because I don't want to make it seem like I have some special insight into the nature of God that others don't have. So, we can only, with the caveat that we can only really speak to our own sphere, right? But yeah, I think that's right. I think that when Scripture speaks about us being made in God's image, I think that includes essentially our rationality, that our rationality reflects something very significant about who God is. It's built into the fabric of what we are, what kinds of things we are. So yes, we're made in God's image, and our rational faculties are an essential component of that. And I take it to mean, this is just one of an application of what it means to be made in God's image. I take it to mean that our rationality reflects something very true about God himself.
Well, that would imply that which is fine, and I think you're absolutely right. Of course, I agree with you, but that seems to imply that many of the accusations that we can hear in our current culture today may not be as true as what people maybe take them to be. So, for instance, the idea that logic and critical thinking and argumentation is just man-made or created by made up by Aristotle or Greek philosophers. So therefore, it's just Greek philosophy, and we as Christians or others should ignore it. Or it was created to be able to mistreat other people of one group or another.
Right.
Are you suggesting otherwise?
I suppose I am. I don't. I hear the kinds of things you're referring to in everyday talk, and I don't really know. I'm not a big historian. I do know a little bit about church history, especially here in the United States in the last 150 years or so. And I know that there was, my understanding is that there was a move towards, I don't know what you might call an anti-intellectualism, whether this was in response to some specific challenges from the scientific community, Darwinism or something like that.
Sure.
And I think that it may have been the case that people began to feel like, here we are attempting to be faithful Christ followers, and we're being assailed from the outside, using what appears to be logic or science or some whatever it is. And so it may have been that it was just sort of a defense mechanism to retreat away from that and say, well, you know what, I'm just going to read scripture and I'm going to believe whatever it tells me. And all that other stuff is just evil, man-made stuff that's designed to throw me off track or distract me from following Christ or something like that. So it may have occurred something like that. I'm not quite sure how it all came about. But yeah, I think there is a misconception that reasoning or logic are somehow bad things or somehow they're inferior. And I think a lot of that is just sort of maybe category mistakes, like not knowing what category to put logic in or reasoning in. And as I said before, I just think that God made us to be rational creatures. And like we were saying at the start of our conversation, I think this is undeniable given how much scripture appeals to our reasoning. I mean, it sort of, me anyway, scripture just sort of presents itself as something that requires a rational, logical person to be able to read and understand what's being said. So yeah, I think it's essential. I don't know if I would try to provide a corrective. I don't want to have the pendulum swing too much, but
Right.
reason is a faculty that God has given us so that we can understand not just the world, but scripture. So we need reason to be able to understand scripture and apply it to our lives.
I think you're absolutely right. I think it's excellent. Well said on that. I mean, as you know, scripture, I mean, we read it. The reason we can outline books of the Bible and put them in an understandable outline is because they're logical in nature. There's a logical aspect to them, and being able to use our reason and rational to discuss things is important. So absolutely, I agree with that. It just seems like maybe people have misused logic and reasoning, and therefore a kickback to that is to reject it as man-made.
Yeah, well, I think the difference there is that I've said a couple of times now that I think reason is a faculty. It's a like vision is a faculty, and so I don't think that it's people using reason itself in abusive ways or unhelpful ways. I think it's people appealing to certain conclusions they say reason leads them to, and then using those conclusions in a harmful or abusive way.
Oh, right.
So it's I would liken our reasoning skill to like vision or sense of taste or touch. It's how we understand things. It's our rational faculties themselves, and like anything else, sure, we can. In a fallen world, we're gonna be drawn towards conclusions that are false sometimes instead of conclusions that are true. We will relationally be in positions where instead of being helpful to someone, we will in some way be unhelpful or destructive to that person. So yes, but reason itself is merely the faculty that God has given us understand. Along these lines, I have been accused in the past, and sometimes by surprising orders, I've been accused of putting reason over scripture, right? And it comes at you in different ways. People say it differently, but we're placing the authority of reason over the authority of scripture. And I just think that that's a category mistake. Reason itself is not the kind of thing that can be authoritative any more than your vision can be authoritative over what exists in the world, right? No, it's just your vision is the way you understand things that are visible in the world. And your vision, that faculty of being able to see, is not the kind of thing that has authority at all. It's not the kind of thing that can have authority. And I think likewise, reason is not the kind of thing that can have authority. Instead, reason is the thing that God has given us to be able to understand the world and scripture. And so I think it's one of those things where reason is so fundamental to who we are that sometimes people don't see it. I mean, you said a moment ago, and I almost jumped in when you were saying it, um, something along the lines of reading, being able to understand what a passage says, being able to put it together. And I think that, I would go even further and say, you can't even understand a single sentence in scripture unless you are employing your faculty of reasoning. That's what you're using. When you read and understand the Bible, what you're using to understand it is your reasoning faculties. So that was a lot. I kind of went on a tangent there.
No, that's fine. That's good stuff. So we're talking a lot about reason and logic, and you talked about a little bit of it in argumentation. How would you distinguish those three things, or would you? So logic, reason, and argumentation.
Yeah. So I guess, I mean, the English language is flexible. We can use those words to mean different things in different contexts. But generally, the way I would do it, I would say that logic is the field of study. It's the discipline where we examine the principles of reasoning. It's a relationship word. It's how things fit together, how ideas fit together. That's logic. So it's the field of study, or the discipline in which we examine principles for good reasoning, how to think correctly, how to avoid thinking incorrectly. I would say that reasoning is the faculty that we have that's inherent to what we are, what kinds of things we are as human persons. Reasoning is the faculty that we have to learn and to understand the world and everything in it. And then I would say that argumentation is it's the principle of communication. Arguments are used to communicate ideas from one person to another. So that's how I'd break that down. I'm not sure if that makes sense to you.
No, yeah, that's good. I'm curious what you think, how you view people's attitude in when we get in discussions, because sometimes things get heated,
Right.
Sometimes we have a vested interest, and we're pretty determined or excited about a particular line of thought. And do you see the attitudes or characteristics of an individual sometimes playing a role in benefiting or maybe undermining a quality thought or argumentation process?
Sure. And I hinted at this earlier when I was telling you about how I have to dispel misconceptions for my students. Yeah, I think that colloquially in American English, we use the word argument to mean a fight, a verbal fight. And that's not the way I use the word at all in my field. It's not a fight. It's not a shouting match. In fact, you don't even need two people to have an argument. And you certainly don't need a disagreement to have an argument. But I think one of the reasons we have
those are good points.
Yeah. One of the reasons why we have these misconceptions, though, is you're right. I mean, and what I said a minute ago about argumentation being a tool of communication, we are dealing with other human persons, and we do get sort of emotionally invested, and other things come into play. And yeah, sometimes we yell at each other when we should be arguing instead. And so I guess, I would say that properly understood, an argument is simply me outlining for you what the reasons are that I have that I think support a claim that I'm making. So if I think something is true and I make that claim that it is true, then the argument is me showing you what reasons there are that support the truth of the claim that I'm making. That's all it is. And I use that, me talking to you, but it could just as well do it for myself. If I have a particular belief and I'm thinking about, well, how sure am I that this belief is true? How confident should I be in this belief? The tool of argumentation is helpful. I outline systematically all the reasons I think there are for why that claim is true, how those reasons fit together to make a case, and then I might consider counter evidence. Are there reasons to think that that claim is false, and kind of put all that together? So it doesn't have to be communicating with somebody else. It can also just be a tool that we use as individuals to help us check our own thinking, to make sure we're thinking straight about the things we believe. So arguments are just, systematic account of the reasons for why we should think a claim is true. But I don't think we should fight with each other. And when we get emotional because we're emotionally invested in the things we believe in, if we care about productive and helpful communication, then we should really work hard to not fight with each other and focus instead on making good arguments.
Excellent. Well, how do you think this would play out for a church, though? Because we're talking right now
Yeah.
about that kind of the academic setting, students writing papers, etc.
Yeah.
Do you see this as being something limited to the academic setting, or something for youth groups, church life, laity? How do you see this working out? I want to say the most common or normal daily living of for Christians, both youth and adults.
Yeah, that's a really good question. There were some practical concerns for why we wrote the book the way we did. For an academic context, if we had gone to Baker and said we want to write a book on argument for the local church, they would have said no, thank you. And that's just sort of the world we live in. And so most of the book is most directly applicable to somebody who might be in an academic context. To answer your question, I'm convinced that all the principles we address in the book there are extremely relevant to everyone who happens to be a human person. Certainly not limited to academic context. I mean, by no means is it. It's just part of what it means to be a human. So, is it relevant and applicable to churches and youth groups? Of course, it's applicable and relevant to anybody who's a human, because it's all about how we think through the reasons that support the things that we believe. Everybody has beliefs that they think are really super important. And what arguments are all about, well, to a large degree anyway, is thinking through the reasons give us the confidence that the things we believe are actually true.
So how would you see that? That's excellent. How would you see that playing out in a youth group or in a family setting or at a church? Certainly the principles you have in your book, once again, good arguments, and making your case in writing and public speaking, giving it to a youth group, go read it, may not be the most practical way, although they should read it. But how would you go about dispensing or utilizing your book to be able to help the youth group and help parents think well and learn to develop this in their life and become better thinkers and embrace a more intellectually robust side of the Christian faith?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm not sure I have a good answer. I suspect that.
Well, here I'm thinking about you've homeschooled your kids,
yeah,
and I'm pretty sure I'm going to go out and I'm going to venture a guess and say, you know what, the issue of argumentation logic probably came up once or twice.
Yeah, and our kids, they are required to take logic, and they are actually part of their high school program. They had to read my book, so yeah, I think you're right. You said a second ago as you were asking the question, go read this book. That's one approach. Go read this book.
Right.
But I really don't think that is what we need. When I say we, I mean the church. I don't think that that's what we need. I think really what's needed is sort of a shift in culture, a shift in church culture that sort of reconnects with this aspect of how God has made us, that is, as rational creatures. I think we need to reconnect with that aspect of what it means to be made in God's image and begin to develop a culture in the church where we, like Jesus did, where we begin to appreciate our reasoning faculties and talk to one another in terms of logic and argumentation and reasoning. I don't, especially, oh my goodness, especially in today's culture where there are so many very powerful competing voices in the world for our attention and our devotion. It's more important than ever to appeal to the whole person, to engage with our reasoning faculties. People aren't going to believe what you tell them to believe just because you told them to believe it. That's just not how things work. If we want someone to believe that Jesus is the Christ, I think we follow John the Evangelist's example and give them evidence, give them arguments that show that Jesus is the Christ. So again, I feel like I'm giving you a long-winded tangential answer, but I do think it's a cultural change that's needed more than just what book you should read on this Sunday school class this semester. I think we need a cultural shift that begins to appreciate this aspect of what God has made us to be.
I think you're right. I think that's very good. Having more of a perspective, paradigm shift, cultural shift, understanding in the church and appreciation for it. But they, of course, won't be able to know what to appreciate unless they read a good book about that. So,
of course, I recommend it.
Okay, I just want to make sure that you do recommend.
Sure. For sure. I think it would be helpful. I mean,
yes.
If I was having a conversation with a pastor who really did want to begin to make that cultural shift, a book like this one, I think would be very helpful because it begins to lay those foundational elements down about what argumentation is, what reasoning is, and what good arguments look like compared to bad arguments and things like that.
Yep. And having read it, I can say it is user friendly. It's very helpful and clear. And I think people can, high schoolers, junior hires, pastors can read and glean from this, learn from this, and apply this type of thing in their church body, in the daily function. And parents can use something like this for helping their kids to Lord willing, learn to think better through controversy issues that come up. It's like, well, what is the argument actually being said? Is there a good argument or is it emoting? And emoting is not necessarily a good argument, though that tends to be authoritative, so to speak, accepted, appeal to pity, but accepted in our culture. And we really need to think about that, of what's going on. And your book will help lay a good foundation for addressing core issues on logic, argumentation, and reasoning, thinking skills.
Yeah, we worked hard at making it accessible, and it's difficult to do this, I think, but I'm pretty happy with the end result. We've got, I know that there are, besides our kids, I've heard of other homeschool groups where you have junior high and high school students reading this book. But I also know of PhD students who are reading this book as part of their work. So everywhere in between. So I do think that I'm pretty happy about how we hit that mark, that it's applicable to such a wide variety of situations. So yeah, that was the intent, and I'm pretty happy that I think we hit that mark pretty well.
That's excellent. I think so too. So, and I've seen it used in classrooms. So it's absolutely. And where I teach, Southern California Seminary, we use it in our undergraduate class, our RS 100 class. So it's required. But yeah. Excellent job on that. Well, is there anything else you would like to add? Anything on your heart, on your mind regarding this issue here? You've shared a lot of good things. And giving a good outline, and also a good basis for realizing that the intellect, the reasoning and argumentation side of life is part of who we are, created in God's image and likeness, and that we need to, as Christians, need to include that in our focus, in our growth and honoring of the Lord, and learn to do that well, including on social media. Yeah. Rather than reacting. And I found myself having to do that. I see something that I really don't like, and I'm ready to react. I'm ready to respond. I'm like, well, let's just think about this. And I take some time to think about it. And it's like, oh, this this whole claim has more holes than Swiss cheese. It's like, okay, let's take this line of approach and thinking through what things are said. So anything else you want to add about this process of thinking, reasoning, and what you have?
Yeah, I mean, what's on my mind is not really an addition. We covered it already, sort of, but just to make it a point of emphasis, um, this is who God us. This is who God has made us to be, rational creatures that think, and logic is what it is because God is who He is, and it's built into the fabric of the universe. And so it's essential to live out our lives as, I mean, humans, much less Christ followers, embracing this aspect of who we are and pursuing diligently what it means to think clearly so that we can accurately understand God and His world.
That's excellent. Thank you, Dr. Richard Holland, co-author of the book Good Arguments, and along with Benjamin Forrest, Making Your Case in Writing and Public Speaking. It's good thinking for all good Christians. So we appreciate that very much. Thank you for your time.
Yeah, it's been great talking with you. I'm glad we could do this.
Likewise. And I look forward to another interview with you on your other book.
Yeah, that'd be great. I look forward to that as well.
God, Time, and Incarnation. Yes, I do. We're going to do that. Okay. Guaranteed. All right. So God bless everyone and have a wonderful day.